Kenya and the European Union have moved closer to the sealing an economic partnership agreement that will grant the East African nations exports duty-free status and unlimited access to the bloc. Both sides had initiated a draft deal in June after 7 months of negotiations. The EU is one of Kenya's biggest export markets. The deal has been approved by the European Union Council last week. It will now be presented to the parliament of both sides for ratification before it comes into force. Kenya is a major exporter of tea, coffee, flowers, fruits and vegetables to EU, which accounts for 21% of its overall export. It buys machinery, pharmaceutical and other chemicals from the EU. And to talk about these, I'm being joined live by an economist, Professor Iraki. Good afternoon from here. Glad to have you join me, Prof.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Now, this is good news for Kenya. Well, more products from Kenya will be sold, in the EU. Is this optimism shared locally as well?
Now, that's an interesting question, because in the last 10 years or so, there has been a shift in terms of thinking of how the country should develop, so that we can shift from foreign aid to trade. So by signing this EPA with the European Union, Kenyans believe that we are going to engage in more trade with the European Union. And by extension, everybody along the supply chain is going to benefit. So if you're a small-scale farmer in the countryside, or if you're a small-scale manufacturer in the urban areas, then you probably have something to export in the European Union. The only concern is that the agreement has been signed, but the fruit will not be seen immediately. It will take time for the people in the lower echelons of the supply chain, the small-scale farmers, small-scale manufacturers, to be integrated in the European Union. So it's a good idea, but the fruits are not going to be seen now. We probably need to wait a bit.
But Prof, does this have any implication whatsoever for other members of the EAC?
Yes, that's one of the big bone of contention, because the Kenya signed this agreement with the European Union, and the other East African countries seem not to have been ready. So they seem to believe that Kenya has gone ahead of them. Kenya has not followed probably what is expected, because at the beginning we would have had that agreement signed between East Africa or East African Community and European Union. So I expect some issues to arise in future as we start implementing that particular agreement. The other East African countries might feel they have been sidelined.
But then how soon, do you think the Parliament of Kenya and the EU can ratify this?
I don't know how soon, but I expect the Kenyan Parliament to be very quick in ratifying that particular agreement. It should be seen as one of the quick wins for the new government to have a trade agreement with one of the major trading blocs in the world. So I don't expect any hindrance in the Kenyan Parliament, but I'm not sure about the European Parliament. I suspect it will also be very positive.
Do you foresee any stumbling blocks for the agreements locally or from the EU?
Ask the question again.
Do you foresee any stumbling blocks for these agreements with the EU or, in fact, even locally?
I think locally I might see the stumbling block in terms of the other East African Community members. And some observers believe that if you look at this agreement, it is group-sided, in the way that the two regions, Kenya or East African Community and the European Union, are at two different levels of development. So the European Union will be exporting very high-end, very high-quality, very high value-added products like machineries and other manufactured products to East Africa. But we shall be exporting mostly primary commodities, as you mentioned earlier, coffee, tea, flowers, and other primary commodities. So most likely in the long run, there will be misalignment. I expect the European Union to benefit from a trade surplus. So I think that's one of the major concerns. And the other major concern is how soon this agreement will be implemented, and the people along the supply chain, from the small-scale farmers, the big manufacturers in Kenya and East Africa, start seeing the fruits.
All right, thank you so much for your time, Professor Iraki, an economist. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and happy holidays.